Honorable Vice President Sri Mohammad Ansari ji, on behalf of the National Institute of Advanced Studies and on my own behalf, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you once again to this institute. You may recall your visit to NIAS in 2008 when you inaugurated the academic block. I am happy to report that we have come a long way since then. Our faculty strength has increased, our research agenda has become more robust, and we have a vibrant doctoral research program. Excellency, we have two options. Our faculty would like to interact with you. Would you like to say a few words before they start raising specific issues, or I can ask them to start with their words?
It's always a pleasure to come here. The thought in my mind when this idea came up of a visit to Bangalore and a visit to this very eminent campus was that I will educate myself, because to be very honest, the way I see things from where I am located, I get the impression we are getting lost. Of course, it's a vibrant democracy, great diversity of views, great deal of noisy debate, less of quieter debate. But when we started our journey in August 1947, there was a sense about certain core values on which there was no great disagreement. And all this took another 2 years to take the shape of that one document on which we have to swear. That is the Constitution of India, which, if you look at over the past 60 years or so, you see the wisdom and the foresight of those and the insight of those who drafted that document. 47, we were not rich. It was hand-to-mouth existence. Food ships had to be awaited. We were not even militarily in any great shape. But we had a certain notion, an idea that was motivating us, and that was making us a different kind of force in the world. Now, I get the impression somewhere we are lost. We have a great deal of disagreement is fine, political debate is fine. Some few months back I gave a lecture, this is the annual Sardar Patel lecture, where I said that the greatest achievement of Sardar Patel and his place in history is that he brought about physical integration. But even he at that point of time said that was the lesser, the easier job. The bigger job is to bring about the meeting of the minds. I get the impression that meeting of minds has not taken place. In fact, we seem to be slipping away from it. So, what are the implications for us as a country, as a people? And then, of course, there are a great many challenges. You've referred to each one of them. Are we getting the answers? And if we are getting the answers, are we able to implement them effectively? I'm not very sure. 2 days back I was attending the conference of governors that Rashtrapati ji had convened. And there was a discussion, amongst other things, on education, which gets related to the subject on which I wanted to hear a great deal from you, is what we claim to be a great asset, demographic dividend. But is it a dividend or is it a disaster in the making? that depends on the way we address the agenda for education. So, I mean, these are the questions. Unfortunately, these questions are not being addressed. I hope Chatham House rules apply.
Yes. Yes.
I have to be careful. They are not being addressed sufficiently. And if we don't take that seriously, we would get into avoidable trouble. So I would very much appreciate, I've seen your list of questions. I'll of course answer them, but I would like to go beyond that, to hear from you your perspectives on, are we on the right path? Are we not on the right path? Have we deviated? If so, how do we go about making the correctives? And what role can, an institution like this and others in the country, I mean basically places where people do take time off to think seriously, what role can they play, and how do we bring that into the public domain so that it has an impact on the policy making process of the country? I think I'll leave it at that, and now I'm in your hands.
Thank you, Excellency. Some people have given questions, specific questions, but you heard, Excellency.
No, I'm not ducking the questions.
No, no, we will definitely ask the question, but there are only 3 or 4, and subsequently they will also give. That means they should elaborate not only the question but also possible answers. So maybe we'll start with Lady Anita. Please introduce yourself before.
Thank you, Professor Ramurthy. I'm Anita Kurup. I'm in the School of Social Sciences and Educationist by training, and I've been at NIAS for the past 18 years. Your Excellency, this question is something that has always bothered me, and I've been sort of engaged in research in this area. Like most countries in the world, India also faces an acute shortage of trained scientific engineers and scientists. Yet we are unable to recruit and retain women in science to augment the numbers that we are looking for. Can India evolve a policy that will help and lead the world in terms of showing the way in which women scientists can be attracted and retained in science?
Well, why only women scientists? A scientist is a scientist. Gender is irrelevant. The honest truth is that we are not getting enough people to go into the disciplines of physical or biological sciences. I remember in the year 2000 or 2001, when I was Vice Chancellor at Aligarh, I had posed this question to my friend Professor Deepak Nair, who was then Vice Chancellor of Delhi. I said, I noticed that people are running away from scientific research. And he said, you are right, because if 100 students take admission in BSc honors in various science disciplines, at the end of the first year, 30% go their own way, because they were using that time to prepare for IIT or IIMs or whatever else it was. And at the end of the second year, another 30% go away. So at the end of the third year, only 40 or so remain who get an honors degree. And that is the time when some more peel out because they want to get into the government services and all that. So what you are getting at the end of 6 years master's degree in science, is through multiple processes of filtration. Someone who is not going anywhere else is coming to become a researcher. I mean, that was his conclusion. It was a bit of generalization. But this is the disturbing thing. Now the question is, how can we correct it? Look, the earlier grievance up to the 5th Finance Commission was that university faculty was very poorly paid. And that was the truth. 5th Finance Commission brought it on par with what government in government services, the best that it can offer. And that is a class 1 officer, more or less, which resulted in the take-home salary of a professor being more or less on par with that of at least an additional secretary in Government of India. Or maybe slightly higher, slightly less, I'm not sure. But we haven't found any impact of that on scientific research. Government has instituted a whole series of scholarships, this, that and all. I had occasion to give a convocation address at IIT Delhi a few years back. And while reading up for it, I discovered a very strange thing. A very high percentage of students who go for master's program in IIT Delhi are not IIT graduates. They are graduates of other engineering colleges who come to IIT for a master's degree. So what happens to the cream of the cream, which is the IIT graduate? He's going in a different direction. I mean, the conclusion I draw is that we have a crisis of social values. After all, a scientist has to be a willing scientist. You cannot force a person into a laboratory and ask her to produce, her or him to produce results. It doesn't happen. So how can we do it? That is the question. Incentives, government within its capabilities, I mean, this is the view I hear from ministers, is that it's doing all it can. It obviously cannot do it on the same scale as some of the more affluent countries, but it's not producing the desired result. So I really don't know. I think everybody in Delhi is also groping on this. They are coming up with new schemes, new ideas. But whether it is being taken up or not, and to what extent it is being taken up. I mean, our PhD output is hasn't really gone up. It hasn't. Then there is a question about the quality of PhDs. Forget about this institution. I'm talking of the average university. There is so much of back scratching taking place. I appoint you as professor for one of my students and you appoint me. I discovered in Aligarh that the science faculty has an old rule that one examiner would be from outside the country. So my question was, why not other faculties? And the answer was very vague and ambivalent. It was decided some years back, was the answer. So I said, these things have all to be documented. So show me the Academic Council resolution. There was no resolution. There was no resolution. So I probed it further. I was curious. I asked some of the older professors. They said, well, it was thought it was too cumbersome. And therefore, by general agreement, it was dropped. So I said, well, let's bring the rule back for all faculties. Believe me, I'm not exaggerating. For the next 6-7 months, no theses were submitted. So you give me the answer. How are we to get more people into it? Government is willing to, make it sufficiently attractive. Obviously not on par with banks or financial institutions, but sufficiently attractive in Indian terms. But it's not getting the results.
If I may just take up to go further on your suggestion that we are lost in some way. is that, I was just wondering whether that is in some sense the result of our not being willing to recognize what we have gained. In the sense that one of the things that we tend to look down upon is the success of our democracy and the success of, in many senses, the consciousness of rights across the country. And increasingly we are tending to scoff at what we have, increasingly scoffing at our democratic gains and the people who are elected representatives of that. And that leads to a rather larger question as to, can we keep promoting rights-based analysis, understanding, without ever coming to terms with the conflict between different rights? And we can see this. We have a right to food bill without an explicit or widespread discourse on the conflict between the right to food and the right of the farmers to earn a livelihood. We have a right to information bill without any widespread discourse on the right to either privacy or even effective policy making. So is this the result of some kind of contempt for of the consequence of democracy? Or is it an unwillingness to look at earlier discussions, particularly the ones that Gandhi went into in great detail, on how different rights had to be negotiated, not necessarily in back rooms, but in the public discourse, in the public domain? And whether we can, in any sense, get back to those, whether we have the mechanisms anymore, particularly with Parliament turning dysfunctional and the media turning authoritarian. Do we have any mechanisms left in which, when there's a conflict of rights, we can discuss it?
There is pervasive pessimism, and I'm afraid some of it is fueled by, the constant 24/7 reports of failures all round. There are no failures, there are shortcomings, but there is no comprehensive failure. The fact that, we can feed ourselves, our population was what, 370 million in 47? We are 1.25 or so. Then we had to get food from outside. Today we have enough food. We export food. It's a different matter that it's being distributed unevenly. That's a separate debate. But, I would say that you're right, that the claims for right are not in tandem with parallel claims of obligation. You see, a half-hearted attempt was made, I think this was when was it, during 75-76 period, 51A, duties of citizens. But it's never been amplified, and I'm not sure if the Supreme Court has pronounced on it in any great detail. But if I'm a citizen, I have duties too. The society has a right to call upon me, and I can't take the refuge behind individual rights. It has to be a harmonious interpretation of rights, rights of the individual, rights of the society. Without that, no society can function. So we are lost. But one major reason for that getting lost is, you see, the highest forum of debate is the Parliament. Well, the Parliament has become dysfunctional. The state assemblies have become dysfunctional. Now, in a democracy, one has the right to agitate and one has the right to debate. But there is a place for agitation, there is a place for debate. If you interchange them, then there is chaos. So this is precisely what is happening. I mean, when Parliament is sitting, almost every day there is an agitation from some quarter or the other on Parliament Street, which is the accepted place for agitation, or Jantar Mantar or something like that. But if you bring that agitation in side the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha, then debate goes out of the window. So you don't have debate. And if you don't have debate, then you take actions, or the government of the day take actions in a hurry, because they also have to do something to keep the machine going. And if somebody who knows the law much better than I do said one reason why so many pieces of legislation are being struck down by superior courts is that drafting is hasty, and debate which corrects faulty drafting is not taking place. So I think the problem is that we have moved away from assigned procedures, and I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, privately, everybody agrees. Once inside the chamber, it's a different story. So there is a problem. But how the problem is to be corrected, nobody has come up with, leave aside a comprehensive solution. Nobody has even agreed to discuss it seriously. You see, you're only looking at the gain of the day. That is the problem.
I'd like to ask you with a question with reference to your last remarks. When you say that the question is in the context of the earlier remark you made about demographic dividend or the demographic profile that's emerging, but with reference to the last remarks about dysfunctionality of Parliament, would you say, what would you say about, is there a difference between the two houses in this respect, but also in general? The bicameral system was set up with a rational elder house as the Rajya Sabha, with less hasty point of view from the day to day, and a sort of sage council and so on. So in terms of the content and the quality of the debates, would there be a difference between the two houses? And now that it's turning dysfunctional in that respect also, would there be a difference? And the question I had in mind with reference to demographic dividend, on that issue in particular, has Parliament any mechanism like the Joint Select Standing Committee on Human Resources or the Parliamentary Forum on Youth? Have they had an occasion to focus on this thing, which is potentially a strategic asset but will not deliver a dividend on its own? It has to be worked for, and therefore a profile, a priority created at the highest level, which then hopefully can translate down as priorities for every functioning department of government. Looking ahead 30 years, that we will have this, we will have an asset potentially, but what do we need to do today to be able to utilize it, and what are the risks if we don't? Because it will be basically mean it's actually a youth bulge, wrongly called demographic dividend, on the assumption that it will fall our way. It's only a demographic profile. And that the youth can be a tremendous liability. Dissatisfied, frustrated large sections of youth, unable to be accommodated in the system, either by way of education, employment, and so on. So both the risks and the gains, would that be something that has engaged Parliament or should engage? Even, like to my mind, even a special session of Parliament on that issue may not be too much to think of, but I don't know. Thank you very much.
Second question first. I think as far as official thinking is concerned, and that goes beyond the National Development Council has met recently, approved the 12th five-year plan, and this is one of the things. It is taken for granted, it's a statistical reality that there is a youth bulge, and the argument of the economists is that gives us a clear advantage in global terms, because our population would be young even 20 years from now, when others would be sloping down. The government thinking is clear. that we have to develop the wherewithal for taking advantage of it. But the youth bulge by itself is not an asset. It has to be turned into a capable, competent workforce, which brings us all to the entire system of education and skills training, on which the Prime Minister has been speaking for greater part of his 2 terms. But it is not getting sufficiently translated. Now, partly the problem is of structure. You can decide on a policy in Delhi, you can decide on funding in Delhi, but beyond that, implementation of that policy has to be done in states. And states have their own, legitimately, they have their own views on certain matters. So they may or may not assign sufficient importance to it. It's happening to a lot of otherwise very good, very innovative programs, that when they are going to states, states have a different set of priorities, whatever the reason might be. And I don't want to go into the politics of it. So that is the problem. How do we convert this potential asset into actual benefit? And it all hinges on the success. There are policies in place, I mean, in the sense that the National Development Council has approved the framework, ministries have worked out on policies, how many universities, how many institutions, how many skills training schools and all that. But how soon are they going to be a reality on the ground? 1. 2, there's an acute shortage of teachers in the country. What are we doing about it? As a first reaction, when the shortage became public, people started opening teacher training colleges without any wherewithal. Someone came and told me that the city of Jammu has got the largest number of teacher training institutes, and great majority of them are bogus. A gentleman, a young man from UP came to see me one day, and this was 2 years back. I asked him how are things. He says, oh, the primary school teacher is the best job going. So I said, why? He said, because Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan has opened up all these opportunities and you get a salary of 20,000 rupees. So I said, that's very good. He says, no, I haven't finished my story. He said, after you have taken the job, you don't have to teach. You just surface, when your pay is to be collected, give a certain agreed share to whoever gave you the job, and then go and sit at your shop or do your farming or whatever it is. So this is the problem that is coming up. Now your other questions are about, I think I'll be guilty of contempt if I said anything against the other house, and I would of course be partial to my own house. But no, I think this would be considered by everyone. Rajya Sabha has 245 members. Lok Sabha has more than double. So one is the numbers. Second, generally, though not totally, the members in Rajya Sabha are people who have had a wider experience of life in their own field. So when Rajya Sabha gets down to serious work, and I underline the word when, then it does very good work, because the quality of debate is high. The inputs are coming from people who are very knowledgeable. And my prayer is that it would do so all the time, but it doesn't do so all the time. That is the problem.
Nabil Mancheri, an assistant professor with the International Strategic and Security Studies program. Your Excellency, I have two related questions. As we know, in the Western countries, the interaction between scholars and government agencies is much higher, and people keeps on moving both sides. But while in case of India, we don't see this kind of interaction much. And is it because of the bureaucratic apathy that they don't want us to go there, or is the lack of credibility from this side? And the other related question is, what is your opinion on the role of think tanks and research institute like NIAS in the decision-making process of the country in general, and particular, especially the decision-making in the foreign policy, related to foreign policy? Thank you.
Well, you have a point, but I attribute it to our deep-rooted faith in caste system. The political class, whichever political class is in power, thinks it has the monopoly of wisdom. The bureaucracy always thinks it has the monopoly of knowledge and wisdom. So the kind of interaction which one sees is extremely beneficial to some of the more developed societies is lacking in our case. I mean, effort is being made to close the gap, but I would say it's not sufficient. I mean, in United States, it is possible for a person to be in a think tank and then become an assistant secretary or deputy secretary of state in the State Department. So they have this constant, flow in and flow out of knowledge. That's not happening in our case. We put too much of an emphasis on secrecy. This is nothing has been done about it yet. I hope something will be done. But we would benefit greatly from much greater interaction. To some extent it is being done. There's this new multi-headed creature called public diplomacy. I object to the term very seriously, but that's besides the point. Because diplomacy is not public. The results of diplomacy should be public. But at least this is a first attempt by the government to reach out to a wider body and say these are the issues and what do you have to say on it. But I agree completely with you that we need this input. Look, government doesn't have the monopoly of all information, and more than information, assessment. Some of that knowledge is scattered around the country. I mean, even in the think tank circuit, the think tanks in Delhi get a much higher profile than elsewhere in the country. Now, these are failings, but I think, the silver lining is that it is being realized. I agree with you, it would be of great benefit if we could do it. And particularly, the field I know, which is foreign affairs, inputs from those who study the problems is very essential.
If I may pick up on the 2 points that were raised in previous discussion, both education and the fact that we have structures in place, but our structures, our institutions seem to not align with each other, and at times they might be working cross purposes, something aligned to what Professor Pani brought up. I want to share a little bit about my research, and last 2 years have been working with the NIAS team on education among the Adivasis or tribal communities, and we submitted the report to the Ministry of Human Resource Development and also the Ministry of Tribal Affairs.
in our fieldwork, we kept talking to ministries and also people of state departments and various other government agencies. And something that sort of came out and struck us was the fact that Adivasi education has been extremely fragmented institutionally, administratively. So Adivasi education has been handled by Human Resource Development Ministry, by MOTA, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, by Ministry of Forest and Environmental Affairs, Social Justice Ministry, so on and so forth. And further again, it gets fragmented through different programs and schemes that again seem to work at cross purposes. Another thing that also struck was through our conversations, we got to know that this is the problem, and this problem has been known for a while. So it's not, so this is coming from the people that we talked to. Yet nothing really has sort of come out of it. And again, I want to go back to your initial sort of address in which you said that how do we understand the problems and how do we imagine solutions? Seems like the institutions acting in cross purposes seems to be the recurring problem. And again, my question is where do we go from here?
No, I agree with you. That is the problem. That's a problem with a lot of programs of the government. You see, the administrative structure is very inflexible. The social requirements cut across these boundaries. And what is needed is a much greater flexibility. But how do you bring that about? Person A is in department X. It's the same thing as the previous question. Why don't we get inputs from outside? There is a psychological problem with us, all of us. We are not easily receptive to divergent opinions. Now, somebody from outside will give his or her opinion. As long as it is not motivated or malicious, it should be taken on face value. But we don't have that temper. So, you will find that government agencies would, at least mentally, if not on paper, categorize people. His views are okay. Other person's views are not okay. There's a friend of mine in Delhi, a great authority on water problems. But he doesn't get much attention in government because his views are different. So we have to bridge this. We have to be more open about the work being done. We have to be more open about, bringing out and publicizing shortcomings, and more communicative. I wish I could answer you differently, but I'm afraid that's how I see it.
Maybe one of the students here they are all research scholars here doing their PhD.
And there you are.
They are all sitting quietly.
I hope you can disprove my thesis, but...
Would you like to ask anything? Yeah? Setar, you want to say something? He is a historian.
Well,
and it took me some time to understand what he is doing in this institute.
Your Excellency, we have been growing as a strong democratic nation year by year and election by election. It is true. But this strong democratic country is facing an unprecedented intolerance and corruption. And today we have reached a stage, as a citizen of this democratic country, I am not able to express what I wanted to express because there is more moral policing all around me. Where are we heading? Are we really defining democracy in a different way? This is a question which haunts me every day. And every day we see intolerances multiplying
And not even a painter could paint anything, you see, without seek permission of the moral policers. This is the situation here. What is the solution for this is one. And the second thing is those who are supporting supporting pillars of democracy are considered to be the most corrupt people you see now. And they are in power. And this country cannot progress, you see, without first you see, looking into this problem. We are all aware of it. And we know that we are also part of it. But we also claim, see, that it in a democratic country, the reforms take a lot of time. This is an excuse rather than anything else. What do you think should be the concern of the government? And how do you think, see, that the citizens should breathe freely under such circumstances?
We are so fond of using the expression tolerant, intolerant. It's the best adjective to throw at somebody. But what is our ground reality? We are a very plural society. That's not given by law, it is given by God maybe, or whoever designed the way India would be. So my personal view is that tolerance is not enough, because it is really a negative concept. What we need is a much wider circle of acceptance. You accept the other. The other may look different, may speak another language, you may have different food habits. You accept it. But to accept, you need that, for that, a frame of mind, which unfortunately is very often not present. And secondly, you need to have a framework of that acceptance. Now, as far as modern India is concerned, the only framework which is accepted is the constitutional framework. There is nothing wrong with our constitution. There is much which is wrong with each one of us in greater or lesser measure following that constitution. You see our Bill of Rights chapter on fundamental rights, you can't find fault with it. There was in the early 50s, there was a famous political scientist in Britain, Sir Ernest Barker. The last book that he wrote, he put the preamble of the Indian Constitution on the first page of the text. And he said in the introduction, I've done it deliberately because this is the embodiment of all the right ideas. But if you don't follow it, then obviously we would have trouble, and we are having trouble. I mean, intolerance is growing, there's no question about it. Everywhere in the country, intolerance is growing. And if we have to be a cohesive society, then we have to collectively think how to stop it. We're not doing enough about it because, again, being we are on a 5-year cycle of elections. So people see the immediate advantage or disadvantage. Would it help me with votes or not help me with votes? Perhaps civil society, whatever manner you define it, but then civil society itself is becoming very, very intolerant. I think Mr. Ramchandra Guha wrote an article in one of the magazines recently. The kind of hate mail he gets for whatever he had written. Now, why can't we just take it as somebody of some eminence who has written something? You disagree with it, all right, disagree. But why do you have to resort to hate? That is the trouble. And that is why I personally, at least, I worry a great deal about social cohesion. You know, political problems, economic problems, they'll all sooner or later take care of themselves. But the backdrop to everything is social cohesion. Are we investing enough in social cohesion? My impression is no. I mean, why do I have to have one identity? I can have many identities. And in the final analysis, the choice in a free country, the choice of identity that I opt for at a particular moment can only be an autonomous one. If I think I like the game of cricket or hockey or whatever it is, and a particular moment of time between competing demands, I decide to go to the cricket match, why should I be prevented? But you need a different kind of social framework. I'm afraid we are not creating it. The media, particularly the electronic media, which has a tremendous reach, has become something which focuses on one-liners. Now, one-liners are very good. I mean, those who can say things in one line. But not every citizen is endowed with that capacity. And there are many things which cannot be said in one line. So why sort of hold the gun to people and say, do you agree with this? Don't you agree with this? That is the difficulty. You see, this country has lived with plurality. And there is no way by which you can erase that plurality. North, south, east, west, anywhere in between.
Corruption, which is another disease, which is eating away democracy.
Yes, it is. But then, is it recent? Is it confined to... Look, the difficulty is, I mean, we interpret our social milieu in a way which is uniquely Indian. I don't know about other societies. We bribe our gods, or whatever we hold in great reverence. There was a man in the mid-70s, he was a very notorious character because he was indicted by the US Congress as a great bribe giver, being a foreigner. His name was Khashoggi. Adnan Khashoggi, that's it. Now, there were a lot of arms deals and things like that, and he was identified by one of the congressional committees as, the kingpin of the whole thing. And he was quizzed by someone, said, why do you resort to this? So he said, no, I never give bribe. I have never given a bribe in my life. So the questioner said, but you have. He said, no, I have only rewarded good results. So, no, it is something which is seeped into our bloodstream, very honestly. And it is not going to be, raised by, magical solutions. Because if somebody, just about everybody is guilty in some measure or the other.
Your Excellency, taking the discussion on democracy further, you have mentioned more than one time that India is a plural society and our democracy also needs to be applauded. Actually, we have done well compared to, relatively well compared to our neighboring countries. But, if I could just mill, a parliament need to be an index of the society, and that pluralism need to be reflected in the parliament. And if you take 2009 Lok Sabha election, an MP spending average 8 crores per election, and the kind of crorepati's proportion we have in the parliament, this is definitely so that India is having a representation in the parliament. And as a factor of solution to this whole problem of corruption and other issues of pluralism not reflected in the parliament, we have not done the electoral reforms, and to that extent we have inherited a simple majority election system which is inherited from such an undemocratic thing like horse race, where a winner horse wins all and all the losers lose all. Instead of this FPTP system, first past the poll system, had we gone for a PR system of election, that proportional representation system of election, I think this representation, in the true sense, that one vote should represent one value. If I just tell another half a minute, in 2009, the amount of votes polled by JDU, Nitish Kumar's party, was same as the amount of votes polled by Prajarajyam party of Chiranjeevi. But Prajarajyam party got a 0 seat in parliament, whereas Nitish Kumar went away with 20 seats. So the votes that has been given by the Bihari votes got overvalued, whereas the Telugu votes got undervalued because of this simple majority system. So my question is, of course, I think this is a thing which would need to be discussed in the parliament, and most of the problem, if you take from the village election to the MP election, the kind of corruption that goes in probably would get decreased, and the kind of horse trading happens, and the kind of like Congress being dependent on maybe Trinamool Congress in center, but Trinamool Congress doesn't depend on Congress at the state, because winning 30% of the votes, you can went away with 70% of the seats. That would not happen if you go for PR system of election. Your comments on that, please. Sorry.
This is music to my ears. In December, I was invited to give Ambedkar Memorial Lecture, and I raised this question. My question was, is the representative actually a representative? The data is very disturbing. In the present Lok Sabha, something like 79%, 78 or 79% of members were elected on less than 50% of the vote. Now, since our voting average is about 60%, and if you are getting less than 50% of that 60%, what it really means is that you are winning with the support of 20 or 25% of those who cast their votes. So obviously the system is faulty. We opted for which, whatever reason might be, it was just that we thought the British system was good, first past the post. But it is not delivering the results. Now the thinking at that time was, the debate was proportional representation as against this. That it would lead to, proportional representation would lead to fragmentation. Well, fragmentation has taken place without proportional representation. So there is a clear case for, there are 2 or 3 options. And I suppose all of them can be considered, should be considered, but I am not sure if they are being considered. In fact, there is a high-powered committee which is actually working at the moment on electoral reforms. Some suggestions have been made by the Election Commission. Option 1, make everybody vote. There should be a cost for non-voting. After all, you are a citizen, you claim the rights of citizen. Why not the duty of a citizen? There are countries like Australia and all where there is a penalty for not voting. That's one. Second, that you make the winning candidate obtain 50+1. And if necessary, as they do in France, have a rerun between the topmost two. The third is proportional representation, that everybody is represented according to his, her strength in terms of percentage of votes polled. But having said all this in a theoretical framework, let me show you that nobody in the political spectrum on any side is going to accept it. Because this would mean a loss. So you are right, I mean, you are absolutely right. This question has to be raised, it has been raised. There are different bodies who are been working on it, different people have been speaking about it. The former Election Commissioner, Mr. Lingdo, has spoken about it, Mr. Chawla has spoken about it. I mean, the only reforms that they are focusing now is elimination of criminality. But that is essential but not sufficient. If you want to make it truly representative, then you have to do it. And there are a few other things which can be done. You see, we have now become a polity in which there is an election every month of the year. This state, that state. I mean, we started by having general elections, everybody voting at the same time. But then derailments took place for a variety of reasons, some of them very genuine. And one current factor which hampers it is the requirement of security. Now you just don't have a policeman for every booth at the same time. So you move forces. Last election in UP, they conducted it in 5 installments. I don't know what the practice here is, but there are states which do it in 1. But some of the troublesome states, you have to do it in different installments. But these are all things on which there should be much more debate. Now the debate is basically outside. It is not within the political system for reason I gave you. You have to bring it into the political system because they are the people who will change the law. And some of these laws can be changed. It does not require a constitutional amendment. It just requires a little adjustment of rules. But I don't see that happening. Not just as yet.
Thank you.
Thank you.